So Ohio State defeated Indiana by a final score of 23-3 in a game that I honestly thought was kind of an underwhelming performance, to say a little bit of the least. When I first sat down and I did watch the game in live time, I thought it was actually a lot worse than what I think now. After re-looking through the tape, looking through the stats, and really going over everything, it's not as bad as I initially thought. But I still think there's a lot of problems still with certain components of this team. Also, to start with the good though is the defense, and we got to take it with a grain of salt because it is Indiana, and they didn't have a quarterback situation figured out, and they're not known to be a great offensive team or a good offensive team at that. But I mean, the defense played really well. I thought the secondary had them locked down the entire game. Denzel Burke looks like he had a great offseason. He was a bit of a problem last year. He looks really good. I'm glad that Josh Proctor was back. He was making some big hits right off the bat. He had that one. So he played a really good game. But yeah, I think the secondary kind of shined in this game a little bit, really just stopping them. And, I don't even know if Indiana took a snap in the red zone. So, and they were held to, I think it was 154 yards. So in all, you got to take it with a grain of salt because Indiana is not the most sound offensive team. But if there's a positive takeaway to take away from this game is that Ohio State defense played really, really well. Now, offensively, this is where, a few issues just arise. And, I think the first one is I think that straight off the bat, we need to instill more confidence in whichever quarterback we're going to go with. And obviously, McCord played the majority of this game, but there was still a series where, you took him out, and I know he had thrown pretty terrible interception, but you put in Devin Brown, then you only put him in for like 3 plays, and that's going to mess up anybody's head. You cannot get in the head of especially young quarterbacks who don't have a lot of experience. That makes him think, oh, crap, if I make a mistake, I might get yanked out of this game. You do not want to have that. So I think what he needs to do is, at the very least after this Youngstown State game, Ryan Day needs to make a definitive decision on who he's playing. You can't do a 2-quarterback system within this respect because they're just 2 different quarterbacks and they're too unexperienced for it to work. But, overall, I was not really a fan of how McCord played, but I think, some of that falls on Ryan Day and, some of the play calling that was happening. They were lining up in I formation like several plays in a row. When has that ever been his offense? I haven't seen Ohio State run I formation that many times since probably the Tressel era back in like 2010. So I thought that was kind of ridiculous to kind of just like switch up a dynamic, somewhat spread-like offense that leans towards the passing game to open up this run game, which we all know that where the strength is of Ohio State, and it's this unbelievable receiving room. And, Marvin Harrison Jr., he was targeted like 8 times, only 2 catches, 18 yards. That's a bit of a problem. Obviously, he probably had that 1 touchdown if he didn't step out of bounds, but still, they didn't get to him the ball that much when they should have. And, I just think that they got to do a better job of calling better plays to put this offense in the right position to succeed. I think some of that might have been because there's just no trust in the O-line, and they played a pretty atrocious game, this offensive line. And, they're going to be better. They're going to be a better product. This was their first game. But, there's ways where you could make plays around them that just make it easier for the offensive line. This I formation is kind of putting them to the test right off the bat. So I didn't really like that they were running the ball too much. I feel like Ryan Day, the knock that I just have with him through this is he just seems really timid to do anything. And, part of it is, if we're looking at the grand scheme of things, Ohio State under him seems to never start off with a good week. Like even under a good week 1. Like even last year against Notre Dame, they came out flat the majority of that game, won 21-7. So he never really has had a good week one, and that's what I'm trying to factor this to maybe. But at the end of the day, this one game doesn't define the season. Obviously, this one game is just the surface, and at the same time, it's a 20-point win against a Big Ten opponent. Now, I believe they're probably the second worst team in the Big Ten, but it's still a 20-point win against a Big Ten opponent. So I don't think you can take too much from this game, but I think there's some clear things that need to be adjusted. And as of right now, surprisingly, all the big issues come from the offensive side. But I think that, if he can I think after this game, it's going to be definitive that Kyle McCord is the starting quarterback. They're not going to even mess around with putting Devin Brown in. And I think that the play calling is going to be a bit more up-tempo and a bit more pocket presence than it was in this one. But, overall, when I first watched the game, my panic meter was probably around – I was probably at a solid 8 on the panic meter scale. Today, after watching more film, after realizing it was week one, after comparing it with other stats, panic meter's at about a 5. So I mean, not unbelievably worried, but there's still a creep of doubt there. So I'm excited to see. We're going to know what we have after week 4 against Notre Dame.